and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. As we arrive at the Endnote session of this year's Graduate Research Meet, I hope that our participants who have joined us from different parts of the country will return with much to reflect upon and take away from this academic exchange. As I already mentioned yesterday, but I'll come back again on briefly what our Graduate Research Meet is about. Each year, the Graduate Research Meet adopts a theme that reflects the interdisciplinary nature of the humanities and social sciences and encourages holistic and meaningful dialogue across disciplines. This year too, staying true to its spirit and to its core ideals, the theme was chosen to be perspectives in humanities and social sciences, trends, methods, and challenges. As we begin today's Endnote session, we are delighted and honored to have with us Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri. Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri has retired from the Center for the Study of Social Systems, CSSS, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Her research interests have been on the making of the public discourse in modern India, focused on nationalism, colonialism, neoliberalism, and feminism in India. She was a Dart visiting professor at Albert Ludwig University, Freiburg, Germany, a visiting fellow at Harvard University, as well as at the University of Massachusetts, and the first ICCR visiting India chair, McGill University and ISID. Her other published books include The Practice of Sociology, Feminism in India, Sociology in India, Intellectual and Institutional Practices, Refashioning India, Gender, Media, and a Transformed Public Discourse, and Doing Theory Locations, Hierarchies, and Disjunctions. She is one of the co-founders of Doing Sociology, a digital resource dedicated to the cause of public sociology. She has been the president of the Indian Sociological Society, ISS, from 2023 to 2025. May I also now request Dr. Abhishek Kashyap, one of our faculty conveners for this year's Graduate Research Meet, to kindly felicitate our distinguished speaker with an airy shawl and a bandati.
What happened to
They seek your apologies. What would be a GRM without a tiny mishap?
Maybe this can be deferred to
yeah, you can
It was here all this time, so we can proceed. A little bit on our tokens of appreciation. is also known, is indigenous to Northeast India, also known as the Ahimsa silk, as it is cruelty-free and the yarn is extracted without killing the silkworms. And on the other hand, the Banbati is a part of Assamese craftsmanship, rich craftsmanship from Assam, which is a traditional bowl typically made from bell metal.
Thank you so much.
And now, may I please have the honor of inviting our Endnote speaker, Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri, to the dais. And before we begin, may I kindly request all the members in our audience to keep their mobile phones on silent mode as the Endnote session is about to commence. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you for this opportunity to spend these 2 lovely days in very joyous, we always assume that intellectual spaces should be full of joy, but I think I spent 2 wonderful days where people were really actively engaged. So thank you for inviting me for this. My problem is that after 2 days, while I enjoyed myself immensely, I'm very confused, because when we started off, there seemed to be a certain agreement about the social sciences and the humanities as pitted against STEM or the other sciences. And the more I heard, I sat through sociology, I sat through history, I didn't sit through literature, but then probably, there was a certain period in our prime working period when the lit crits had become hegemonic. So we have some familiarity with what literature people do. And then I was sitting and having coffee and I overheard the discussion among philosophers, and that simply foxed me completely. And I said, what do I have to say which would be common between the social sciences and the humanities, and within the social sciences too, what is it which is common? So I had a very neat abstract, but I was far away from here. I was in my own house writing my abstract, and that is, you can write neat abstracts which don't look into the messy things. So I thought of talking about social sciences and modernity, understanding the contemporary social. But after spending 2 days here, I said, okay, social sciences I understand. I can talk a little bit about why social sciences are intrinsically modern, but humanities are not. I mean, in a certain sense, questions of literature, poetry, questions of philosophy go back a long time. Then I got even more foxed because I heard a presentation about dismissing the very term modern and modernity. And I said, okay, I'm not even very sure about what the modern is, so how do I proceed forward? But then what happens with people of my age, we are fixed in our views. We've honed them for over many, many years. And I would have a certain understanding of how I enter the idea of the modern. In fact, interestingly, when we were young as students, in sociology, which is the vantage point from which I'm speaking, with what I'm most familiar with, we rarely talked about the modern. In fact, we talked about modernization. And we talked about the modern as distinct from the traditional. Okay, completely different kind of legacy. And it was only with the coming in of a certain kind of, maybe postmodernism, critique of modernity, understood as a particular form of consciousness or awareness or way of looking, that the modernity became a kind of all-encompassing word through which you entered. That doesn't mean we are all agreed upon what constitutes or what defines what is the modern or what is the modernity. So like I said, my abstract was simple, social sciences and modernity, understanding the contemporary social. And I have to now have so many caveats that do we have agreed understanding of modernity? Do we have agreed understanding, is there anything common between social sciences and the modern? And I was always certain that I can only speak primarily as my experience as a sociologist, and not even a sociologist whose main interest is in the practice of the social sciences. That is how we teach, how we learn, how we write. I have very banal sources that I look at: syllabus, fights over syllabus, what topic should be included, what topic should be excluded, the everyday minutiae through which larger debates get encompassed, which theorists should be added to the list, which theorists shouldn't be added to the list. I've also been interested in the way it's practiced across different locations. So you have metropolitan universities, you have very well-trained teachers in particular universities. You would have at some other place a certain kind of, I don't want to use the word lack, but a different kind of training or lack of training where everything can go as social sciences or sociology in particular. Arjun in his keynote mentioned that economics had a slightly different kind of positionality. Very often in some parts of the country it is an MSc degree and not an MA degree at all. So you see it as a science degree and therefore a certain validity. I come from sociology, which is really at the bottom of the heap, where we have always been able to, have been forced to explain what is it that we do. And in the contemporary social, there is a certain urgency about deliverables, that what is it that you have to offer? Why are you studying this? What is it that, how will it help us to understand or solve? The word solve a particular kind of problem. So that there is a kind of imperative demand, and people have to cater to that demand and say, okay, we now have the whole question of skills. That you have to develop certain kind of skills to do it. So I look into all that, but I'll sort of begin a little more systematically, and then I finally come in my presentation of our self-representation and our need to explain, and a certain misrecognition of what social sciences or sociology in particular is, and a catching up syndrome. The catching up syndrome means that, okay, we are not so smart today, but tomorrow we will be, in the sense, okay, the common idea of that you have a certain hierarchy of social sciences, and physics being right at the top and sociology being right at the bottom, the obverse way, because we're dealing with complex phenomena. But it's not that we won't be able to have exact science. At some point, we will have exact science, and we will be able to do things which are dramatic. And therefore, for example, there's always a demand, both from the students, not so much from the students, because what happens is the classroom is constituted by the regimes of power that be. So if there is a demand for deliverables, then obviously you have to cater to that deliverables, So you want to know what is our specific skill? What is it that we can offer, and what is tangibly applicable? What is it that we've discovered? And we discover very little. We discover very little. And we had this crisis, particularly in COVID. If you remember during the COVID, and it's not too long back, but we seem to have an amnesia where people were dying, we had quarantine, the whole world came to a store, and people were walking miles and miles to go back to their villages. Bodies were being burnt on the pyre, but that's not what I'm trying to look at. At that period, if we always felt inadequate, we felt extraordinarily inadequate at that period of time, because you had frontline workers, you had nurses, you had doctors, you had sanitation workers, they were losing their lives, and what were we doing? What could we do which could be of any tangible thing? But shortly into COVID, other issues started arising, like who are the people who can clean their hands with sanitizers? Can you have quarantine in a situation where you do not have any space for people to be quarantined? So we started realizing the structures of society and people who study structures of society do matter. And suddenly, again, historians would know that we started looking at a phenomena which, say, many of us had never even thought of or heard of, the Spanish flu. What happened to different pandemics historically at different periods of time. So we realized one thing which really struck me, that if we tried to be frontline workers, we could possibly become doctors, nurses, and sanitation workers overnight. That's not our skill. So there should not even be an effort to train us in what is not ours. But we have abilities which then look into questions of seeing how does the pandemic, who's more vulnerable, who's less vulnerable. Doctors, epidemiologists started saying that look at sociological work, social science work, historical work, how does it affect people who are more vulnerable, who are more less vulnerable, how does inequalities increase. For example, you would be familiar that during post-COVID, what we witnessed was a rise in the age of girls. Child marriage jumped up, and we had dropout rates of girls from schools. And why did so many little girls get married during COVID? And this is a trend which hasn't changed since then. So we have to ask different questions. So that's the first thing, that there is obviously something which is very specific to the social sciences and humanities. It gives you a kind of questions which do not address necessarily to the immediate. You know, the immediate is important, but the immediate has to be always located in a larger context. So this is broadly what I have to say, but let me sort of begin by saying that I sort of got interested in the kind of location that the social sciences inhabit, particularly sociology in the hierarchy of knowledge system, partly from my own experiences. As a young woman in my times, for many of us who came from relatively privileged background, to do English literature seemed to make sense. You know, you did English, you got some kind of job, or if you didn't, you got married. And then when I did English for my BA, and then I did sociology for my MA, and nobody asked me any questions. Because they thought, I mean, that's fine, this is like time pass, you know, like until you got married. Now my brother, he did chemistry and switched to economics. A lot of people asked him lots of questions, that you were so bright and why have you left the sciences and you've gone to economics, whereas nobody asked me anything at all, you know. So I was sort of curious at that kind of life. And then I would have begun on this note, but that this, as we say in the social sciences, we study about patterns, you know, which is not unique in certain sense. That this idea that what we do in social science is of little use and therefore unlikely to be worth much in the employment market. It's also seen easy and usually a last option. The brightest students therefore do not opt for them as they're worth little in the job market. Social sciences therefore are graded poorly. These ideas I wouldn't have started with if it was only confined to our lay ideas or our commonsensical ideas. But these ideas are also ideas which are held by policymakers. And at the time when this debate was happening a lot about relevance and utility and deliverables, it intensified during the heydays of globalization, late 80s, early 90s, through the 90s. Today we've reached historically a different period where people started using the word deglobalization as a buzzword, which is unlikely to happen, but there is a new trend. But during that period, the idea of use and relevance became very intense. And as in social sciences, we look at how did it become so popular? How is it that everybody started then talking about use and utility? And for that, usually, I know I'm looking very nervously at philosophers here, but there we would say in sociology there is a certain kind of causal relationship over here, because education was getting revamped globally. And today, maybe the international institutions don't matter too much. The UN is getting happily dismantled. Nobody talks about them any longer. But during that period, the World Bank, for example, and many of the international institutions were talking about revamping the educational system. And they had a hierarchy of how that revamping would take place. For example, there were debates even in Indian newspapers that say third world countries, within quotes, or poorer countries, they don't have to do philosophy, or they don't have to do history. What they really need is skills, like how would a bridge get built, or that kind of thing, you know, or for Africa, the syllabus for those countries should be different. You could still have these higher education stuff in the global north. That too is changing now. So there was, as social scientists, the first thing is, I feel, and as a sociologist in particular, contexts are important. Contexts are extremely important. In which period did this begin? This was also a period where in the global north, it was post-Cold War, the actually existing socialist societies had collapsed. So it was the time when there was a lot of celebration that the walls have broken up, and you know, the world is large and flat, and everybody could do whatever they felt like, both the free market as well as a kind of democratic freedom politically and economically. So it was the context becomes very different, very different. In the global north, once the Cold War ended, the situation was different, and you had increasingly a certain response to the increasing presence of immigrants, the possibility of global markets, wanting to internationalize education. It didn't happen suddenly. multiculturalism that didn't happen suddenly. You had concerted attempts, and my generation, we actually witnessed it and participated in it. You had the USFI, you had the Fourth Foundation, you actually brought in, especially particularly in the US, not just mid-career teachers, but very high-end established professors who would come to India and would be exposed to Indian scholarship to see how their syllabus, say whether it's like, say, I would be called for gender, how you should bring in knowledge which is being produced in the global south, to internationalize their curriculum in the global north. So there was a context which was taking place there. Now, if that context is not specified, and that's where history is important, politics is important, sociology is important, then we will continue to take the starting point of a theory as the starting point. So I hear a lot of presentations and they would say, like I said, my nervousness about using the word modern when it was completely dismissed, and that why postmodern critiques the ideas of binary, whether it's nature or culture, or all the other kinds of binaries which are there. And then the question which I would ask as a sociologist would be, in which context does which kind of theory arise? So I was sort of being very shameless and overhearing a conversation on the next table about Marx and Popper. And I wanted to ask, but would be interested to locate Popper. When did Popper emerge? I mean, he didn't just appear, okay? He was not having an abstract discussion with Marxism. It was a particular context within which Popper emerged. So that's one thing I feel social sciences have in common. Social sciences have in common. Economics, when they begin with, particularly neoclassical economics, will begin with an abstract theory of a certain kind of model. Then begins with assumptions. Sociology is very uncomfortable, and so is social anthropology, to begin with assumptions. And so now when I see the historian right here, and I thought, when I used to actually teach a course, methodology of social sciences, I didn't begin with sociology and methodology. I began with E.H. Carr, what is history? Because that's where he's talking about facts. What is it which constitutes facts? How do you decide what is a fact and what is not a fact? Which is important. And so I am very old-fashioned, and I think it's important to look at old texts. It's also important to look at reinterpretations of old texts, but that's extremely important. The first point, context. Context within intellectual ideas emerge. Context within intellectual ideas travel. And why they acquire certain kind of salience in particular contexts. The question of basically production, circulation, reception, which is how Bourdieu would talk about it. It's like, each theory, when did it happen, when did it begin? Now, I can just go off to another tangent. So I would like to divide that very often people want to improve the way social sciences are. It's not relevant, it's not useful, let's change this, let's modify it. And it's usually done in what from gender studies we would often say a stir and add approach. So I used to be involved in the NCERT textbook writing, and this was post-2004 when you had the National Curriculum Framework there. And there was this addition, like basically what they would say, kuch bhi dal do, like aajkal globalization bahut chal raha, globalization dal do. Abhi gender bhi bahut chal raha, wo bhi dal do. And along with that, there was also, what was that horrendous tornado which happened in the 2000s where you had the tides which just killed, what was it called? Tsunami. Okay, tsunami bhi dal do, and therefore disaster management bhi dal do. Okay, and I'm not making any one of this up. They basically said, put them in. What was missing there? A disaggregated notion of knowledge, where the relationships are not looked at. And then I also discovered, that's why I said my approach will be from bottom up, how I felt these things get done. So there are school teachers who are very worried by the way we have written the textbooks, saying that how will we know which chapter for which answers? So we had tried to write the textbooks with gender and globalization as running theme. So even if it is rural India or rural agrarian sociology, we would bring in globalization, we would bring in gender. And it could be family, it would also be globalization and gender. And they said education would be also globalization and gender. So they would say, but how will they know which chapter to look for if the question is on gender? Which basically means the way we practice social sciences is antithetical to what social sciences is about, which is about linkages, intended consequences, unintended consequences, and possibilities of very complex situations within a particular phenomenon takes place. However, when people want to refashion the social sciences, they do that kind of arbitrary act. So you can have one chapter could be on philosophy, one chapter could be on anything, skill acquisition, making soaps or whatever, But that ability to visualize the whole and then to add bits and pieces there would be extremely difficult. The other thing which my experience taught us that you have that the social sciences, particularly economics is different, but the social sciences, political science, history, sociology, anthropology, we use the same words when we analyze. We talk about family, we talk about kinship, we talk about caste. We use the same words. It's not H2O or it is not a particular kind of thing. Now, in that case, how do we decide what is it that we want to talk about? And I find increasingly in the contemporary period two trends which impact and challenge the practice of social sciences and the humanities. One is the larger political economy of neoliberalism, which is not just about trade or tariffs or the market, but it's about subjecting every act, every phenomena, including ancient Indian artifacts or culture, as commodities. So everything is in a certain sense of a certain value. That is one kind of approach, and therefore it must be tangible. Revenue generation model, what are the actual skills you've acquired, how many papers have you presented, what is your API score, how many classes have you taken, a lot of counting, uploading, presenting. That's one stress. The other stress is why do we do social sciences? And for answering that, we again go back to my early point where I say that there's something specifically modern, even if we use the word modern within quotes, meaning we all know about the story of how you had the phenomenal expansion of the physical sciences and the natural sciences, and that what was hidden got disclosed. So you got to know that you have to explain phenomena beyond the facade, and that you will have to have certain experimentation, certain instruments, certain hypotheses, certain tabulation. Social sciences shared some of this and did not share some of this. And I think it is that question that should be, it's not a question that social science is absolutely unique. No, there are certain things which are common. So we may have very kind of crude understanding of what is science, saying if you can't predict you're not a science, then economists should never be considered a science because you're predicting wrong things all the time. But that is not how we understand. But the question of validation, construction of knowledge, and whether what you have put forward can be scrutinized by somebody else within your community and say that you got this wrong, your assumptions were wrong, your method was wrong. That the possibility of cross-checking which is there. And therefore it had a certain kind of autonomy. But obviously it was different because we are located right within it. Our ethnicity, our identity, everywhere, and the terms which use are loaded. So if you have a society which is casteist or racist, or have religious bias, or have very strong feelings, how can caste or class or religion or ethnicity or tribe be ever neutral? They cannot be neutral because they are emerging from a society where these categories are not neutral. They are embedded in hierarchies of power and exclusion. So when people say, let's be objective and let's not be biased, and very often I find almost that when I used to teach in class that everybody took a deep breath and said, We now dump our biases and we'll be objective, but that's not how we try and be objective. What we try to say is that this is the framework within which I'm studying. These are the limits, these are the possibilities, and these can be scrutinized by somebody else. It's not objective in the sense that I may have been born a non-vegetarian and to be free of bias and say, look, like I like vegetarian also. It cannot be that. It is about methodological and theoretical questions. Methodological and theoretical questions. So method is not to apply, or that is a necessary part. You cannot do it without that kind of methodological, even if it is anarchic. What you say, it's anti-method. But it has to be done. Likewise with theory, in anthropology, particularly in social anthropology, there was an argument, say, M.N. Srinivas would often apparently tell his students that don't try and develop a theory. Go to the field will tell you. Okay. Now, I often wonder, but the field didn't tell. I understand what he meant it, but if the field told, then gender as a category should have emerged right from the beginning. But it emerged only after the women's movement in the late 70s, as an analytical category. So there is nothing called preconceptual. What we look at, we already have, I think Arjun called it the cognitive infrastructure, but we already have a way of looking, And I think theory and method shakes it up. It's not that you're giving something perfect or something wonderful in place, but it shakes it up. And the shaking up is critical to the social sciences. It is critical to the humanities. I'll give one example, otherwise I'll feel I've not been fair to people in literature, is that, I'm very fond of Rokia Hussain Sultana's Dream, which is a feminist utopia. And 1905, she writes, it's a dreamland, ladyland. And the story runs like this, many of you would be familiar, that the protagonist falls asleep and she's in a dream. And there is one sister, Sarah, who takes her around and everything looks beautiful, their gardens, their orchards, their fruits, their flowers, everything is perfect. And then she says, how come I can't see any men? And Sister Sarah says that, look, our men are in Parda. Okay. And she says, but that's terribly cruel. Why have you put men in Parda? And she says, but suppose a dangerous animal escapes, from the forest to the zoo, who would you put behind the bars? The animal or the entire village? Now, if you take that example, it is a feminist utopia, but that utopia shakes up the given. I would say it is an extraordinary act of defamiliarization, which is very central to social anthropology and as well as literature. It makes you imagine another world, but it is not fictitious, it inverts. So it makes you think, very different from globalization bidaldo, gender bidaldo kind of approach, And I think that is the role of theory. And the argument that there is nothing which is pre-theoretical and pre-conceptual. In sociology, what we use the word is common sense knowledge and experimental knowledge, all our textbooks begin. But if you look back in earlier debates, like somebody like Robert Park used the word, very interestingly, knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge about. Knowledge by acquaintance is the kind of, RWA uncle knowledge which we have nowadays. So-and-so said this, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this. WhatsApp knowledge, so-and-so said this. Where you don't examine where did it come from, how was it built, how was it communicated, how is it the WhatsApp I received is different from the WhatsApp you received. What are the modes of transmission? What is the algorithm? Are there certain kind of social scripts behind the algorithms? We don't ask those kind of questions which are there, Knowledge about how do you acquire knowledge goes into epistemological, ontological questions, about questions of how do you think society is constructed, constituted, where do you begin, preconceptions. And interestingly, in sociology, somebody like Durkheim would say get rid of preconceptions, get rid of idols. Somebody who's often seen as antithetical, like Marx, would say begin what you do is concrete and tangible, get rid of preconceptions. So if you have to study family, don't go with the ideas about the family you have, but study the family as an object of inquiry, out there entity. If you want to study religion or caste, don't go about the ideas that you have about religion or caste, but see it empirically, and therefore the theoretical and the methodological questions which are so central. The other point which I said when I began is that it's so difficult to say, yes, we are useful, you know. So because, and here I want to sort of borrow from Giddens' work that, you know, we don't make rockets, we don't make vaccines, we don't do that kind of knowledge production at all, okay? So what is it we do? Why is our knowledge not so visible or tangible? And he uses this very interesting word, double hermeneutic, saying that the knowledge that social sciences produce gets embedded in society. For example, you have census, knowledge data is being produced, how many men, how many women, how many Dalits, how many Brahmins, you know, how many Muslims, how many Hindus, how many Christians within Christianity, how many so-and-so, how many so-and-so. That knowledge gets embedded in society. So right in your house, in the dining table, there may be furious debates about census and whether the census is right or not, whether we're being flooded by people coming in or not, what will the demography go. People may want to get married and people will say, look, divorce rates are going up, so-and-so study has come. And so you start taking these expert knowledge into your own. And today, perhaps, sociology always played a part in that, gender in a major way. History, which goes on to the question of being modern as being constituted by this nation or the state. The question, I think in the morning I was listening about memory and why our memories are important and how does it help. And I would still believe serious history, serious philosophy, serious sociology, anthropology, and literature would make a difference because they teach you how to think. That is the only skill social scientists and practitioners of humanities have. They teach you that one skill which is necessary for any good society, a just society, a democratic society. You know. And that thinking, if it is, there was a debate within the natural sciences during the heydays of globalization, saying that if you want to make natural sciences like polytechniques, then there's no future for even the natural sciences. And this is probably more true of the social sciences, that if you want to reduce social sciences to something which is so elementary and needs no expertise, that is the death of social sciences, and therefore the death of a good society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Chaudhuri, for the insightful talk. We will now be pleased to continue the conversation. If anyone has comments or clarifications from our speaker, we especially welcome students and participants of the GRM as a priority. And kindly note that we will take a cluster of 3 to 4 comments or clarifications at one time, and which our esteemed speaker will address together as she deems appropriate. Given the time constraints, we may or may not be able to go for a second round of comments and clarifications. However, I believe the conversation or follow-up questions can also take place outside the hall later. But for now, if anyone has any comments or clarifications from the audience, kindly raise your hands. We'll take the comments together, a few comments together.
Hello ma'am, thank you for such an intriguing session. Just a small question from the last point you have said. You said that the major role of social sciences is to teach to think. But in a bipolarized world that we are seeing right now, as budding educators, how do we cater to that resistance that comes from them? Like we are putting forward some idea, but they are not really ready to accept it or think the way we want them to think. So what can we do to cater to that particular resistance that is coming from them? Thank you.
If we have any more comments or clarifications from our audience.
I think here it's really a pedagogic question, right? And it's not easy, and it's not because of anything specific only to the contemporary, because people come with assumptions already, right? So you're not speaking to people who don't have ideas. They have ideas, they're very strong ideas. And I had a lot of experience there because I worked on gender for most of my life. And in the early years, whenever I used to speak on gender, there would be a lot of resistance. So I may speak on something very specific about a particular historical account. But at the end of it, the response would be, but men are men, women are women, ऐसा ही होता है. So they would not engage with me at all. So part of the resistance is not that there's opposition. There is no conversation. Okay, and I think that is very interesting, you know. And one way is never to say that. I mean, they don't have to agree with you. Why should they have to agree with you? But tell them to have a very sharp argument against what you say. That would make more sense because that is more important, right? Because it's not they're not being able to make you think because they have to agree with you. That they are made to think so they can question you, and then they read just to say that you're wrong, which is a jolly good thing to happen, you know, because then you read. Because I think reading is so important. You cannot write without reading. And without reading, I mean, like I said at the tail end of my life, reading originals, you know, not commentary. That's not going to give it, you know, because that's where you will get your resources. So I think the resistance was always there in specific topics. Resistance can be of another kind, where you don't want to engage with the concrete. So particularly, I don't think it's very much there in sociology. Maybe now in history, little bit, a lot of jargon, right? And literature, I think, you know. So then you feel comfortable once you have all these words around you, you know, and then, you know, like the last class I taught after many years on gender, and every now and then a young woman would get up and say, what about agency, you know? And at the end of it, I said, okay, what about it? You know, now tell me what about it, you know. So there are these buzzwords, and you feel very, you know, comfortable about it, you know. So I think resistance can be of different kinds, which is always there, but I think it's worth pushing it. Yeah, thank you.
If we have any more comments from our audience, kindly raise your hand.
First of all, thank you for your Endnote address, ma'am. It's really amazing to listen to you. Ma'am, during the course of your address, you said that social sciences are not taught the way social sciences actually are. So, I would like to know what exactly it means, basically.
Hello, yeah. You can hear me, right? Yeah. Basically, that came from my own experience, you know, teaching. Because people would assume the social science is very easy. Economics may be a little difficult, you have equations and stuff. But something like sociology or history or political science is essentially descriptive. What I felt is the practice was that the facts are taken for granted. The facts are, you know, reified objects. They are like the pen. So when we take the pen, we don't ask about how's the pen constituted or made, but we are willing to know that pen is manufactured, there are different designs of pen. But when we talk about society or marriage or caste, we very rarely look at the social relations which constitute that, go into, which is invisible. So we say, okay, caste has 5 features, we write the 5 features, family has 5 features. And the MCQ, which is now the vogue, makes it even more pernicious, you know. Once you know it, you know it, meaning you don't know it, but you know it in the sense. And that is, I think, a very, very difficult thing to address. You memorize, you reproduce, you have standard ideas. And if you say there's more to it, you know, then the idea would be that you're being difficult. Why do you want to, why not take it as it is? Which also raises the question when I said knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge about, it's also been increasingly moving to a world where knowledge by authority. So pre-modern period, the idea would be when we do history of sociology, the argument of enlightenment, etc., that earlier knowledge was decreed, that this is knowledge and you do it. And now it's a different thing because of science, etc. Whatever be its merits or demerits of the argument. But today we again have a certain assertion of knowledge by authority, that this should not be taught or this should be taught across the world, here, everywhere, which is also antithetical to social sciences.
Hello ma'am, my name is Nilovit. I had just one small question to ask from you. You have been a student, you have been a researcher, then a teacher in your life, and you have practiced social sciences. So how has the experience been different in terms of like the political climate has also changed over the years. India has gone through massive changes in terms of academic culture. So how has the experience been over the years?
In fact, some of my interest in social sciences emerged from my student days because I didn't understand anything. So I'd go to the class and people would come and teach and I'd listen obediently and write notes. But I found it particularly theory courses and methodology or philosophy courses particularly difficult. And I got interested in pedagogic questions and context, that what is it which is making it so difficult for me, to understand. Some of it is our own propensities, like some people love kinship, I would call it a thing, that's different. So as a student, some of my long interests stem from my early years of being opaque, not. Literature is different. I did literature for my BA, so obviously the connect between reading a poem or a novel or a play and yourself is fundamentally different. It's speaking to you in a direct way. Social sciences is not speaking to you in a direct way, but once it starts speaking, it speaks very well, it's a lot of fun. But for that you need appetite and you have to develop that appetite because it's not what is that you put in an app and everything comes instantly, home deliverable, like instantly. So that takes. As a researcher, again, all of your researchers, I know your times are very different from mine. We could waste time and still survive. You can't. So I wasted 2 years doing a PhD topic, including field work, which I dumped afterwards. And so I would suggest that always take a topic which you feel passionately about, because research is very, very lonely. And if you don't feel passionately invested in it, it's very easy to leave it. So that is as far as research concerned. We had no pressure for publication. I had to ask Vituparna what is Scopus very recently because I had no idea what it was. We just wrote it when we felt like, that was a very different culture, right? So there was no demand for you to publish, nor a world which expected you to do that. Teaching was fun. I really enjoyed my teaching. I loved it. I learned a lot from my classroom. And the idea that, particularly this dialogue, what's the point of teaching if they don't understand? Or what's the point of teaching if they're not asking you questions, even if they disagree? That's perfectly fine, because that will prompt you to ask, why did they ask that? So it's an ongoing, kind of process. So the teaching part has been the most exciting. So that's how it is. But it's a fun profession. Just stick to it. It will be great, whatever you do in life later.
Hello, ma'am. My question was about, as you have just mentioned earlier regarding and you quote as well, Ramesh Srinivasan, that don't try to create a theory, just be in a field and the field will give you a theory. At the same time, while addressing, this answer as well, you mentioned one thing that you don't have a pressure to get published within the PhD sections and you have some time to spare around with the field. so that field will answer something. And you also mentioned that when social science talk to you, it talks in a better manner. My question is regarding if we want to deal with the idea that you don't want to flood the what we can say the theory or the different studies, but if at the same time you want to create some studies as well, and how we can balance those things, because ultimately we are, as you have mentioned, that number of terms are coming up, number of ideologies are coming up, philosophical terms are coming up. We are managing to intersect different sections. Even in this conference as well, we have seen number of papers, researches, which manages to interlink different subjects as well. So how we can, the question is how we can deal with the barrier that we shouldn't do anything unless it is very important, and how we can choose that.
No, you're probably asking the wrong person, because the kind of pressures you all live in, we didn't live in, right? But you'll have to work out your own process of doing it. What you feel is your priority, what are necessary, and if possible, continue to love the work that you do. But that would probably peers would be able to advise you better to do that. You all are better trained in some ways. Like one thing which I wasted a lot of time, I didn't know what to read. So I would read whatever I found on the libraries. It could be anything. And I think your generation would be better equipped to deal with those kind of issues. Anyway, you have ChatGPT and you have all that. Yeah, that's again an issue. And therefore, my advice to students was always, don't have to read too many things. But if you can identify few things and read them well, But I'm nobody to suggest you, because I don't know the actual conditions within you have to operate. But that's something which works usually. You know something well. That helps. There's some fabulous lectures, like on YouTube. I actually heard Berger speak directly not too long back, which is quite amazing at that age. So some very fine. Again, you have to distinguish which are the bad ones and which are the good ones.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah.
And thank you for the lovely session. Ma'am, this is Pallav Datta from MNDS first year. Ma'am, as you mentioned that you were part of NCRT curriculum, as well as you have also drafted a lot of books and all. And as you mentioned that the synchronization of the topics were not as per the context. So what all SOPs generally are taken care while writing a book, and what are the perspectives from an academic professional in general?
Basically, what I was trying to say is that whenever you're writing something, you have to have a sense of the larger whole. And you'll have to have a framework in the sense, say, when we try to do this textbook, there are older textbooks which you can always refer to, but in, say, sociology as an example, you have some institutions, like, say, economic, political, family kinship, religion. You know this is a standard thing done for decades. One way of doing it is you take that same pattern, which people are familiar with, and write it very differently. But I think in the case of history, they wrote it very differently, even the way they put it. That depends on you. But basically, what I'm saying is that scholarship is serious business. It can't be add and mix. One para from here, 3 paras from there. You put it together. That won't work. It may work in the immediate context. You may do well also. But in the longer run, if you want to do serious research, that won't work.
Thank you so much, Professor Chaudhuri, for addressing all the comments and clarifications so generously. We are pleased to take this opportunity to announce the best paper of this year's graduate research meet. The tradition of awarding best paper in our graduate research meet started in the living memory of one of our own scholars, Prashanta Kumar Arukha, who tragically passed away in 2022. May I please have the honor of inviting Dr. Debapriya Basu, on the dais to announce the best paper for this year's graduate research meet. And may I kindly request Dr. Chaudhuri to present the certificate once Dr. Basu announces. Thank you so much.
Hello. It was a very difficult decision, and I'm not the only one of the judges. We have been doing this with Amar Jyoti Mahanta for quite some years now, but this is the first year that we have been asked to do this. Amar could not be here, so apologies for that. He had another meeting, so he had to leave for the meeting. And we also missed the Endnote because of this, so apologies. We really regret missing the Endnote. But this is the first time that we are doing this, so Amar should be here, one, and I should just remove myself. And it was just to say that it was a very difficult decision. For every year, it is always a very difficult decision. So, I mean, please know that if your name does not figure among the two that we are going to announce now, it is no reflection on any one of you. It was a very tough choice. It is always a very tough choice to make. And congratulations to everyone who submitted their papers for evaluation. Thank you. So the first name for the Best Paper Award is Anindita Namhata from Prestigious University. The second is Anushka Tyagi from Indian Institute of Technology, Bangalore. It seems that the recipients are not present. Anyway, congratulations to all of you, and thank you for joining us here. And thank you to the organizers for allowing us to judge the thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basu. And congratulations to the recipients, regardless of